tradition gives speeches or talk or whatever, I appreciate and really cherish response from the audience, right? So what I'm here to encourage you to do before we sort of start the talking bit is just to get a little rowdy if you want. And if you need to I say something you're like, oh, you can be sort of like, let me snap for that, or you can do like a little like here, a little like, ooh, or whatever sort of, whatever expression you need to express, just feel free to put it in the space, because that makes it more fun for all of us, all right? There we go. It is both strange and beautiful to be back in North Carolina, 1 year after I moved away. On the one hand, I am so filled with joy to see all of your beautiful queer faces smiling back at me. It feels so great to be back in my home state, somewhere where I share a common context and a shared sense of place. There is something vitally comforting in the knowledge that the people in this room know what I'm talking about when I say that North Carolina has the prettiest lighthouses in the whole world and the gentlest mountains that you'll find anywhere. It is good to be home with all of you. And this feels like somewhat of a triumphant return. Now that same-sex marriage is legal in North Carolina, I've been joking with my mom, who is seated right over there. I've been joking with my mom that I should get married while I'm in town. I mean, I'm not even dating anybody, and I'm certainly not in love, but I feel like I should get married just because I can. Just to spite Pat McCrory and Paul Stan and all the other churches. I thought about that as my first plan, and then I thought, well, actually, if I want to stay ahead of the trend, I should probably try and marry a woman while I'm home, just because same-sex marriage is hip now, right? So I gotta be like one step ahead. At any rate, I've decided that's probably not the best use of my time and energy here in North Carolina. But in all seriousness, it is incredible to me, only 3 years after Amendment 1 passed, how quickly marriage equality has come to this state. It feels like just yesterday that I was spending every day worrying about accessible polling locations, bothering fellow students to vote, organizing with local leaders, and wearing a sandwich board around my neck that said, I know you're super busy, but it's kind of my civil rights. Please vote against Amendment 1. It feels like just yesterday that I was sitting in front of the TV with my mom, my brother, my best friend, watching as fellow North Carolinians voted to enshrine in our state's constitution just how much they hate people like you and me. But I remember, after the vote was said and done and Amendment 1 had passed, that I couldn't bring myself to be too sad. I couldn't really be bothered to be depressed about the election results, because deep down in my heart, I knew that Amendment 1 was only a temporary setback. You see, I've always thought of conservatives in this state not as sophisticated political adversaries, but, and I want to be delicate with my words here, but more of as spoiled toddlers. They've grown up getting everything they want, they're notoriously bad at sharing their toys, they're incapable of adjusting to new routines, and they still refuse to be potty trained. But like all toddlers, conservatives are growing up, and they are beginning to realize that the world isn't theirs for the taking. Like all children, they must come to the shocking epiphany that they have to share their toys. And as they are coming to that realization, they are throwing quite a few tantrums. So why wasn't I worried about Amendment 1? Because a toddler only throws a tantrum when they realize that they are out of options. They realize that they will inevitably have to share their toys. And so they resort to the loudest, most petulant, and dare I say, the most flamboyant methods possible in order to get what they want. In my mind, Amendment 1 was just one long, drawn-out tantrum in the face of a landslide of changing national opinion. And the recent Senate bill from just a few weeks ago that allows magistrates to refuse to perform same-sex marriages because they have a religious objection, or because they just feel like it, or because they think that two boys kissing is kind of gross, well, that's just another tantrum. And at the end of the day, it is our duty as North Carolina progressives to serve as compassionate but effective babysitters. And we're good at it by now. I mean, we've been doing it for quite some time. Since the Civil War, really, we've been fighting ornery, conservative, oftentimes white, oftentimes heterosexual, oftentimes cisgender little toddlers, desperately trying to get them to share their toys. And we've been very patient. But this is really a uniquely pestilent child, so you wanna know what I think?
Yes.
You wanna know?
Yes.
I think I've made up my mind. I think that it is our duty as babysitters to put North Carolina conservatives in time out. There, I said it. They have simply been too naughty and thrown too many tantrums. I think that they need to get out of the General Assembly, go to their room, and think long and hard about what they've done. And they shouldn't even think about playing with their toys again until they've said sorry for all the tantrums they've thrown over the past 5 years and for the complete mess that they've made in the living room. But I digress somewhat. As I said earlier, it is strange and beautiful to be back in North Carolina. It is beautiful to be back in North Carolina because my home state is now one that allows all love to be seen equally. It is beautiful to know that across the state, LGBT couples are being happily married. But it is strange how hollow that victory feels. When I saw on Facebook that the same-sex marriage ban had been struck down in North Carolina, I was excited, but for some reason I wasn't ecstatic. For so long, marriage equality has been held up as the pinnacle of our struggle as LGBT people. For most of my life, I was told that marriage equality would set me free. I was told that the ability to have my relationship legally recognized was what mattered most. That if we only got that one legal right, all of the others would fall into place. That if the rest of the country could learn to respect our right to marriage, they would learn to respect everything else. And yet, on the day that the same-sex marriage ban was struck down, I had a lingering feeling, not of jubilation, but of disappointment. I was supposed to feel free. We were supposed to feel free. We had finally won, or so we were told. But I wasn't sure how much we'd actually won. The world still felt to me so unequal, so unfair, so full of oppression, and it felt like we won the right to marriage equality not through the will of our neighbors and friends, but on a technicality. As hard as I tried to feel happy, marriage equality felt empty for me, because I know just how much we have left to do. Let's start with the needs of genderqueer, gender non-binary, and transgender North Carolinians. Everyone keeps saying that this year has been a groundbreaking one for trans people, and it has been. The visibility of transgender women of color like Laverne Cox, Janet Mock, and many others has resulted in incredible changes in national perceptions of our community. But the reality is that the movement doesn't end with Netflix. Our movement doesn't end with Orange is the New Black. As a trans activist, I do not care too much if we are represented on the red carpet, if we are still not safe in the streets.
Yes.
Last I checked, 7 transgender women have been murdered in 2015 so far. 7. And how many of those murders have made national news? How many of those lives became the center of a media maelstrom? How many of those lost lives were properly mourned, let alone investigated? When I sit down with movement leaders and they ask, often with a quiver of fear, do you think that people will lose interest after marriage? I have to stop myself from laughing, as if the only thing that our community has stood for is matrimony. As if the rest of the country isn't gripped in a conservative backslide, as if the reproductive rights of lesbian women are not as vital as the right to a wedding ceremony, as if the well-being of an LGBTQ person in prison isn't equal to that of an LGBTQ person at the altar, as if the lives of homeless youth, 40% of whom are LGBTQ identified, aren't a compelling enough cause. The reality is that marriage isn't everything. The reality is that our community is so much broader than marriage equality. As a movement, we have nothing to fear now that marriage equality is a reality in North Carolina. We should not be afraid that our momentum is up. Rather, we should embrace that we now have more momentum than ever, y'all. Our community now has the ability to do what so many before it have never had the privilege to do. We have the ability to stand alongside other struggles. We have the ability to show the rest of the country what a truly intersectional LGBTQ movement looks like. In other places I've been, people talk so often about how vital it is to build an intersectional movement. A movement that acknowledges the complex intermingling of sexuality, gender identity, race, class, religion, and so many other factors. As a native North Carolinian, I have always found talk about intersectionality to be somewhat uncanny. This is because so often when I hear people talk about it, they speak about it as if it is optional, as if intersectionality is the icing on the cake, as if we can choose to have or not to have intersectionality, as if we can choose whether or not to acknowledge that racial justice and immigration reform and ending the prison industrial complex and fighting religious bigotry are going to be involved in our movements or not. As if it is optional whether or not we want to build coalitions with other movements. As a North Carolinian, I have always found such rhetoric perplexing, and that's because for my entire life, I have been, until like the past 9 months, I have organized in a context where intersectional organizing is the only way to get things done. In the context of a place like North Carolina, we must build a broad coalition. We must build with other movements and bring their issues into the center of our political consciousness. As North Carolinians, we must stand as staunchly against racism and as staunchly against classism and as staunchly against sexism as we do against transphobia and homophobia. As an LGBTQ community, intersectionality cannot be the icing on our cake. Intersectionality must be the flower that the cake is made from. It must be so deeply mixed, so expertly baked into our movement that we can no longer distinguish between the individual grains of wheat. The beautiful and challenging part about the LGBTQ community is that we span all identities and backgrounds. And this necessarily means that no one of us can be free until we are all free. Until all parts of our rainbow community are equally empowered to live their truth, love themselves, and love their neighbors, our work is not done. But let us not shy away from this challenge. The challenge of the work that we have left to do should not defeat us. It should invigorate us. It should bring us together as one community, as one voice, to challenge a culture that still does not recognize all humanity on equal terms. It should incite us to march with our sisters and friends in other movements, march straight to the Charlotte City Council, straight to the NCGA, straight to the US Supreme Court if it comes to that, and demand the recognition, funding, programs, and policies that we deserve. The Reverend Dr. Paulie Murray, a civil rights activist, women's rights activist, lawyer, author, proud gender nonconforming person, among other things, who grew up right here. That's right. Let's give a round of applause for that. If you don't know about it, just go to Wikipedia. There's a lot of information there. And the point that's supposed to crown that off is who grew up right here in Durham. Perhaps said it better than I can ever say. As she put it, true community is based upon equality, mutuality, and reciprocity. It affirms the richness of individual diversity, as well as the common human ties that bind us together. That's the kind of movement that I dream we can have in North Carolina. A movement that allows us to celebrate our differences while staying united by our common struggles. It is both strange and beautiful to be back in North Carolina. It is strange because as a Southerner who recently moved up north, I'm starting to see things differently, to appreciate things that I once took for granted. Don't get me wrong, being in New York City is wonderful and glamorous, and I feel like Audrey Hepburn every morning when I wake up. But it is also gritty and dirty, and if we're being honest, a little bit lonely. I really don't think that New York will ever compare with the land of the longleaf pine. Here, people have a stronger sense of community and of place. Here, people say hello to their new neighbors when they move in. Here, people understand what I mean when I say porch culture. The age-old ritual of sitting on a porch, chatting with neighbors and friends, discussing what's gone on over the past few days, and perhaps most importantly, gossiping about other people and their personal lives. It's a beautiful thing, porch culture, and it is quintessentially North Carolinian. It helps us feel connected, ensures that we build relationships with those around us, that we refrain from being siloed in our own small worlds. Additionally, it's part of how we learn about one another and one another's experiences. Through taking the time to sit down with our neighbors, we hear about their struggles, their triumphs, their fears, and their hopes. As North Carolinians, this kind of community is second nature to us. It's in our roots. And historically, porches have been activist spaces, spaces where a great deal of organizing has taken place. I'd be willing to bet that for every civil rights movement we've had here in this state, there were countless conversations had on porches, with folks on porches building community, discussing problems that their communities face, and strategizing how to fix them. Now that I'm in New York, I miss porch culture, and I miss porches. There aren't too many porches where I live in Brooklyn. It's mostly fire escapes, stoops, which are sometimes cute, but not the same, and apartment building lobbies, which are never the same. Because I'm 23, I often get asked questions like, so what do you want to do with your life? Where do you want to live? And when I'm asked such questions, all I can do is be honest with people. I tell them this: I have no idea, really, where my life will take me yet. I do not know where I will live for the next 50 years, but I do know one little thing. Whatever happens, I want to spend the last years of my life on a porch in Durham. I want to spend the last days of my life sitting in a rocking chair on a porch in Trinity Heights, chatting with my neighbors, sipping sweet tea, on occasion a mint julep, floral robe flowing in the breeze, basking in the North Carolina sunshine. But more than that, I want to sit on that porch at peace with the world, content in the knowledge that I live in a North Carolina that is no longer racked by racism, no longer rife with transphobia or homophobia, no longer hateful of the poor. Content that social justice, like pollen in the spring or pine needles in the fall, covers everything I see around me. And I'll be damned if, by the time I retire to that porch, it is any other way. Thank you.